Welcome to today's morning power up call. I'm going to do the standard audio check to make sure that I've got this thing working before we dive in. So let's double, triple check. All right, we are live. Audio is working. We are good to go. I've done it too many times where I haven't checked the audio, and 2 minutes in, I've been like laying down the information, sharing the key ideas for the day, only to realize that the audio has been off the entire time. So I force myself to do the check now because I want to make sure that you guys get the first take, the live take every time. It's good to do this morning power up call. I know that the times have been different, the locations have been different. For me, this is the morning. For some of you, it's not. We're all over the world, scattered everywhere, joining together for this moment to align ourselves, and it's been appreciated, your guys' adaptability and ability to shift with the changing conditions here, which segues directly into what we're going to be talking about today, which is the difference between rigid thinking and fluid thinking, and how to use that in the copywriting process, how to use that in the sales process, and how to use that in your life, really. So this new month's challenge is, for those of you who didn't catch the call yesterday, who haven't seen the announcement in the announcements channel, we've completed our last month's challenge. The Eagles won. Congratulations to the Eagles. But we're starting the next month's competition, which is going to be which legion can innovate and create a new outreach angle or strategy that has a higher success rate of email sends or messages sent, to actual appointments booked, right? And it's going to be fun. We've come up with a way to track it. We've come up with a way to measure this, but it's going to require a significant level of individual innovation and a significant level of creative thought. Now, I'm going to be making sure that over the next few days, my morning power-ups, I share insights that are going to help you with this. But this is the core part of it. And this is where a lot of people run into problems when it comes to approaching this particular problem, which is outreach, right? This particular problem of trying to come up with a solution to stand out from the rest of the world who's reaching out, trying to sell these people something, and instead show up in a different way, in a better way that provides more value to them, and in a way that presents you in a better light. So you can land that first 2 to 3 clients. You can then grow them up to 10K a month or whatever your income target is, right? So you can actually earn that level of income that frees you up to move in other ways, make investments, do the types of things you guys are all here to do. This is the big issue, right? When you go from, let's say you walk off the street from a normal civilian type job, or a normal type job where you've been sort of conditioned to go from, let's just ignore employment and let's talk about school, right? If you grow up, go to school, go to high school, go to whatever your country's equivalent of that is, you don't really learn fluid thinking, you learn rigid thinking, right? They present you with facts, they present you with information, and they give you a very rigid structure in which to apply that. Fill out this worksheet, perform this project, here are the 3 requirements, right? Here's the clear rubric. It's all very rigid and defined, right? So for most of you, you've grown up your entire life operating under a very rigid framework of thought, right? And consume information, apply information a very specific way, basically copy and paste that information across these different fields as you go through it, right? As you take the test, as you do the worksheet, as you complete the project, as you write the essay. And there's been very little self-direction, and there's been very little fluidity allowed in that model, right? That's how most people grow up. That's how most parents raise their children. That's how most schools, raise those kids to go through the program, right? That's how most employment is, right? When you go through the world as a wagee, right? As a slave to the matrix, you are meant to follow step-by-step things and think very clearly within a box, right? You're very clearly supposed to stay inside of this box, and everything you do is supposed to be inside of this box. And that causes problems if that's the framework you approach copywriting with, because copywriting is a game that rewards fluid thinking. It rewards adaptable systems. It rewards a creative approach and outside of the box thinking. So when you sit down, when a lot of students join the campus, they learn, and I've kind of structured the boot camp to be fairly, to some degree, it's rigid, right? You learn a principle, you apply it in a mission, you take a quiz, you move on, right? That's really helpful to help you download those basic principles. But I'm seeking to add new elements there to help you develop in some cases, weak side of the brain, the creative side of the brain, the outside of the box, the fluid thinking side of your brain. Because this is going to be extremely important for you, right? If you most people operate as if the world is an assembly line, right? It's as if you're a robot in an assembly line building a car, and your job is to tighten this bolt 3 times and then flip it over this way so the guy next to you can do that. That's how most people think. Whereas copywriting success and success in life, really at the kind of scale that you guys are looking for, is more about fluidity. It's more about being able to be adaptable, right? And I'm going to give you a metaphor to help you understand this, right? If I was to, let's say I plopped you down in like some mountainous terrain, imagine like, big mountains with trees and rivers and stuff like that. And I give you a task. You're on this mountaintop over here, and you need to travel over here, maybe let's say 5 miles away. There's a few hills, a river you have to cross, that type of stuff. Would you rather have let's imagine, would you rather have a little vehicle like that they use at the airport to like drive the baggage around, like a very, very small little thing with those like solid wheels, no suspension? This is designed to move the baggage. Or would you rather have, let's say, an off-road vehicle, a Jeep with, a snorkel so you can go through the water, with good steering system, adaptive shocks, adaptive suspension? Which of those two would be more valuable for you when navigating that kind of different terrain, right? It's very obvious that you want the one that has the more adaptability and the ability to change in different conditions. Entrepreneurship and landing your first clients and developing copywriting is more like that. It's more like a model where you're in a world where the terrain is different. It changes. There are different requirements, and you need to develop the ability to be fluid. However, there are some things you need to stay rigid on, right? There are some basic human principles of human nature that those things stay the same, right? There's maybe 20% of the knowledge that I present that is absolutely like, it is absolutely going to be there, and it's an absolute mathematical fact you have to deal with, right? It's a law of nature, and you have to be kind of rigid with your adherence to those. However, the way in which you do it, the rest of it is all fluid. So when you're approaching a problem, it's important that you become aware of your tendency to think rigidly and think inside of the box. And you need to ask yourself what ways you can break free of those constraints. Once you've identified those constraints in your thinking, you need to try and find ways to break free of those, right? A lot of you approach the copywriting outreach method that I share inside of the campus from a very rigid perspective, right? It's like, okay, these are the outreach things. Compliments must be like this. Subject lines must be like this. CTAs must be like this. Prospects must be like this. There are certain assumptions that it's all built upon. And that frame certainly does work in a certain part of the world, like a certain subset of prospects, a certain subset of copywriters, like that will work. A copy and paste rigid application that will work over time. However, you are going to be rewarded if you can learn to understand the core part that should stay the same, the human nature part that stays the same, but adapt the way in which you apply those laws. You think of outside of the box methods to apply them. Rigid thinking versus fluid thinking. Identify the key principles that you cannot violate, that are true, but identify the parts where you can completely and entirely adapt from those. You can completely and entirely ignore, change. They're completely open to fluid thinking. If you know anything about the way that they create swords, right? Like back in the day when like they would forge a sword and they create it for battle, right? There's a couple things you want to have happen when you have a sword in battle, theoretically, right? I don't know because I've never fought in war with a sword, but you don't want your sword to shatter. You want it to be able to flex, right? If your sword is too rigid and you attack somebody, it shatters, right? So you don't want your sword to shatter. However, you want the edge to be sharp. If they make a sword and they optimize only for the fluidity of it, it's never sharp enough, and it just bends whenever they try and attack an opponent. You go to chop his head off and it just wraps around his head and it doesn't do anything, right? If you make a sword to where it's too brittle and too sharp, so it's just super, super sharp, the instant it comes across anything that's difficult, it shatters, right? The sword shatters, which is a terrible, terrible thing to happen. Can you imagine in battle, you swing a sword and it shatters, and then you're left to die without a weapon? So sword makers over time developed a really interesting way to solve this problem. They created a sword that the core of the sword, right? The core part of it, the central part, was fluid, right? It could bend, it could flex, right? But the very edge of the sword was extremely rigid. It was extremely sharp, hard, right? So what that allowed the sword to do is when you would bring it to bear, it was fluid, it wouldn't shatter, right? The core of the sword would stay the same. Maybe you nick the edge a little bit if you came across another sword or something like that. But like the majority of the sword cutting edge was still there. But it maintained the sharpness on the edge, the hardness that allowed it to have the cutting power, right? Your brain must become something similar to this. There are certain principles, there's certain things about your personal identity, there's certain things about the way that human nature works that needs to stay rigid, right? You need to hold yourself to a pretty high standard, right? There needs to be some significant level of discipline in your life. However, there's a lot of principles where it's important to have flexibility. So I want you guys to take these concepts and review your own thought process as you perform outreach, as you perform your writing, and try and identify places where you perhaps are too rigid or places where you've been too flexible, and play with those variables. Try and approach the problem in a more flexible way, or try and approach a certain issue from a more rigid perspective, right? And you'll identify a good balance that allows you to operate on point with those core principles while still giving you flexibility to identify new solutions outside of the box so you can show up, be different, and you can earn outsized rewards for your time. So that's the core concept of rigid thinking versus fluid thinking. Now, take this, and again, you've now become aware of it. Use this awareness to identify opportunities inside of your own process and improve them, right? As you identify this, you'll come up with new ideas for outreach. You'll come up with new ideas for interacting and working with your fellow students inside of the program. Take the insights that you have and share them with the rest of the people inside of either the mindset channel or inside of your Legion or inside of the boot camp as you go through, because these ideas that you arrive to by using flexible thinking, by using outside of the box perspectives, will trigger insights in them that then allow them to think outside of the box in new and exciting ways so that they can share those ideas, which will trigger your ability to think outside the box. Creativity is kind of like a virus. The more that you show people how you can think outside the box, the more they'll start to think outside the box. And it sort of spirals and creates this positive feedback loop where everyone starts thinking more creatively, if that becomes the point of discussion. So take this information, take this awareness, apply it to your systems. When you find new insights, when you find new things that are helpful, share it with the fellow students so that the level of creativity that you are exposed to increases as well. It's been a good call, good concept. I'm going to be sharing more things about this type of optimization over the next few days. If you're inside the Eagle Legion, I've got some more advanced content that I'll be sharing with you as well as your reward for winning last month's challenge. But stay tuned. Again, stay adaptable, stay flexible with the schedule as I move through the world, finding value for you guys. So I will talk with you guys again in a roughly 24 hours from now. It's been a good call. I'll talk to you guys later.